Welcome to this morning's session of the Science and Technology Select Committee. We are undertaking a one-off evidence session on mathematics education in schools. My name is Robert Mayer. I'm the chair of this committee. I'm very pleased to welcome our witnesses for this first session. We have Lynne McClure, Chair of the Academy for the Mathematical Sciences Education Workstream, Conrad Wolfram of Wolfram Research, and Charlie Stripp, CEO of Mathematics Education Innovation. This session is being broadcast on Parliament Live. A full transcript is being taken. That'll be made available shortly after the meeting to make any corrections. So I would like to start, please, with the first question. We have a contradictory picture about maths education in the UK. On the one hand, the number of people doing A-level maths is a record high, but at the same time, the GCSE pass rate fell in 2024, and around 40% of students failed to pass GCSE maths. In this context, we've heard about the cuts to the AMSP programme with some alarm, AMSP being the Advanced Mathematics Support Programme. So how would you assess the overall state of mathematics education in UK schools? Is the situation improving or is it deteriorating? And also, could you discuss the role that the AMSP has played and whether there is any sign that it is being replaced? So, Lynne McClure, can you start with you? And when you first speak, would you just like to introduce yourselves a little bit more, to say something about yourself? Lynne, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Lynne McClure, and in my role here today, I am speaking as the chair of the Education Workstream for the quite new Academy for the Mathematical Sciences. Previously, I was a secondary mathematics teacher, then I became a primary head. I worked in teacher education, and latterly I have been working within Cambridge University on a project called Cambridge Maths, which looks at a digital representation of the mathematics that one might expect students to be able to experience between the ages of 3 and 18. And I am a trustee of several mathematical charities. So my answer. So maths education is a very complex landscape. Tim Oates talks about curriculum coherence, meaning that curriculum and assessment and PD and resources should all be connected. But all of those, even if all of those are in place, the problem that we have, the negative thing about maths education at the moment, is that we do not have enough maths teachers. And I think that is at the core of quite a lot of what's happening. At A-level, the number of girls taking A-levels is lower than that of boys. We have some maths deserts where we don't have the capability to be able to teach, for example, further maths. And I know Charlie will talk about the AMSP and the way that supports it. GCSE is a bit of a disaster for pretty well 40% of the population, because they don't pass it, and that means they've done 11 years worth of schooling and they have nothing to show for it. Personally, I think that's morally pretty reprehensible. 60% pass and 40% fail. And once they failed it, at the moment they are committed to retake until they do get a grade 4 pass. I think primary is in a pretty good state, actually, and I think that's largely due to the work of the maths hubs. There are 40 of those around the country, and they support professional development for teachers. But the curriculum in primary is very crowded. I know that because I chaired the last curriculum writing review, and we had a lot of pressure to keep putting more things in rather than looking for something that was supportable and practical to do. Early years, we have a lack of specialists in early years. The government decided that people working in early years did not need a maths GCSE, and so we have a lack of maths understanding in early years. There's lots of good things, though. Standards generally have been increasing, and in PISA and in TIMSS we've got reasonably good results, but there's still a long way to go.
Could you say something about the AMSP, the cuts to that programme?
I think that Charlie is the person who has all of the numbers on that. So if that's okay, I would pass to Charlie to do that.
That leads to you, Charlie. Say something about yourself as well, please.
Okay, so I'm Charlie Stripp. I'm the Chief Executive of MEI, Maths and Education Industry. It's the charity that I lead. I'm also the Director of the National Centre for Excellence in Teaching Mathematics, which is what coordinates the work of the maths hubs. So I have a very sort of broad picture of what's going on in maths education in England. Lynne is right that it's a very mixed picture. I'd certainly agree that the teacher shortage of specialist maths teachers is the major issue that we need to tackle. In terms of the cuts to the AMSP's funding is being reduced, but the AMSP is continuing. I'm still in negotiation with the government about the final shape of it, so I can't say much more than that at the moment, but I can say that the support it provides for professional development of maths teachers, A-level maths teachers and core maths teachers, the support it provides for young people who wish to study further maths A-level but who aren't able to study it in their own school or college because their school or college hasn't got the provision to offer it. The AMSP can pick that up as well, and that is continuing. So one of the things that's happening to the AMSP, this committee I think will be interested in, is the idea that we're recognising there's a recognition of a change in the nature of mathematics and the amount of digital technology involved, and the need to kind of think about how we can prepare our young people for a more digital world. I know Conrad will be here, pleased to hear that. So I think that we are sort of thinking about a transition to how to make sure that we are equipping our young people in the best possible way for using maths in work and life. Thinking about what Lynne was saying about GCSE, there's actually one figure I'd like to correct. At the start, you said it's 60% failed GCSE maths. Actually, 70% of young people pass GCSE maths at age 16. The overall pass rate is lowered because many people have to resit GCSE maths post 16, and they're very likely to not pass. So I think of the students that get a grade 3 in GCSE maths at age 16, which is below national expectation, it doesn't count as a pass. But only about 45% of those manage to achieve a grade 3 by the time they're age 19. If they start with a grade 2, only 13% of them achieve a grade 4 or above by age 19. So I think that there is an issue around GCSE resit and around a significant proportion of the cohort. So 30% of the cohort certainly is not well served by a current maths curriculum. Yep. I think that the numbers around A-level maths and further maths are extremely good at the moment. So we have, I think, 107,000 students took A-level maths last year. That's a record proportionally as well as in absolute numbers. We have 18,000 students taking further maths A-level. That's also a record. I was involved in what is now the Advanced Maths Support Programme. I did the pilot work that started that. It was actually funded by the Gatsby Foundation from the year 2000 to 2005. We then got government funding from 2005 for the Further Maths Network, which became the Further Maths Support Programme, which is now the Advanced Maths Support Programme. So it's been funded successively by governments for 20 years. And I think that that's a way in which we've managed to get such good increase in A-level numbers. And I think that the professional development it provides is absolutely essential. So I think that teacher shortage and ensuring that teachers have got really excellent access to professional development is absolutely crucial to improving maths education. Lynne also alluded to TIMSS and PISA international comparisons. We have never done so well in those as we are at the moment. So that is a very positive thing. Okay. But on the other hand, we want to be a leading economy. We need to be better.
Okay, thank you, Conrad. Do you want to add anything? There are a lot more questions coming, as you know. But
well, yes. So just to introduce myself, my day job is to run Wolfram Research with my brother, and we started 36 years ago to basically deploy mathematics everywhere where it could be deployed in the world. So we see mathematics from virtually every angle imaginable, with tens of millions of people using it around the world in every walk of life, including education. So I have a rather broad perspective on, I think, the main issue here, which is the misalignment between the actual use of mathematics in the real world and almost all of our education, particularly later on, less so at primary. This is not just a problem of the UK, it's a problem around the world. But when you're looking at these metrics, you've got to ask exactly what are we trying to do with a compulsory subject in this space. It's very important to, I think, distinguish a compulsory subject from an elective subject of any type that people find interesting to do. The chief problem is what we're focused on is mostly calculating by hand. And that's not really what's happening in the real world. People don't do calculating by hand very much at all. And so what we're measuring mostly, and including PISA and TIMSS, is how well people calculate by hand. And that really isn't what we need for the AI age that we're getting to.
Indeed. Yeah.
And I think the problem with this is it means that when we look at scores in A-level, for example, there's a certain amount where we're pushing people to do that subject because it's important to get into university, but it may or may not be, in some cases, a subject they really would like to do.
We are going to come to maths curriculum fit for the future in a few questions' time, and I think that's perfect for you to expand more on what you're saying, Conrad. Lord Stern, you'd like to ask the next question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For transparency, my first degree a long time ago was in mathematics, and I helped Philip Bond in the work for the report, The Era of Mathematics, and I think I suggested the title to him, and I think the title's important, actually. There'll be a supplementary question on Academy of Mathematical Sciences. But I wanted to talk about the balance of the allocation of resources to different age groups. And in particular, the previous government under Prime Minister Sunak had a policy proposal to require maths to 18. On the other hand, the new government has said that it will replace this with a proposal with a focus on early stage maths, focusing on primary maths as a first priority. Do you think this is the right priority? And are there any signs of these policies being implemented after they were pledged? My guess is that all three of you might be interested in that, but I'm happy to leave it to you, Chair, to do the choreography.
Okay. Lynne, would you like to answer that first?
Yes, thank you. The key reason for looking at early years is because the data says that the disadvantaged gap that emerges in maths between birth and age 16 is formed 40% in the early years. So 40% of the effect on small children happens in the early years as far as their mathematics is concerned. The early year curriculum, there is a curriculum, there are early learning year goals, and those don't include anything to do with shape and space. And so the early years curriculum needs looking at in order to put some of that in it. And I mean, in most early years settings, they do work on shape and space. But if things aren't in the early learning goals, then they have they are seen as being less important. And work on shape and space is really important, not only for future understanding of geometrical understanding, but actually it also affects your understanding of number. So it's a really very important part, and it needs formalizing. I think the other thing is the caliber of people who work in early years. They're not just babysitters. They need to be really knowledgeable about the way in which they can support very small people to understand and come to grips with mathematical concepts. Previous government removed the need for early years colleagues to have a maths GCSE. And although maths GCSE may not be exactly what they need to be able to teach early years, it does really say something. If you can't get a maths degree, then you need something else which is much more relevant and better training for early years specialists.
Thank you. Conrad, you said a little earlier that you think that the early stage part of the maths teaching is reasonably okay. Is that
well, I mean, notwithstanding what Lynne said, which I agree with. I mean, look, I'm usually a great advocate for early stage intervention is so to speak, the most effective. But maths clearly diverges from real application badly, I would say, at late primary. By the time people are solving quadratic equations by hand, they're starting to wonder why they're doing that, and they got a point. And another part of that is many of their teachers in their real lives don't actually use anything that they're teaching beyond that level very much. So that tells you that there's a problem with that as a mainstream subject. So I think by the time you're at A level, we reckon it's probably about 80% mismatched on subject with what one could optimize. And just to add, I think there are three categories one wants to at least understand. There's people who elect, because they're excited by the subject in its own right, to do it. An important group for any subject, whether it's this or ancient Greek. And we should encourage them and help them because it's valuable to them and to society to have those people. There's another group which is our, so to speak, highly technical, high-flying people for the AI age who need a mathematical application background to be able to function, and that needs to be at a high level. And then there's everybody else who needs just to follow decisions made by government and in their lives to have a good computational literacy, as I would call it, background. And so I think it's important to think about those separately in these contexts, although in fact the answer to some of those may be the same result.
Thank you. Charlie.
Okay, I'll talk about maths to 18 and early years separately. I'll talk about early years first. Lynne is much more expert in early years than me. But the question Lord Stern asked was about what is happening, what's been put in place around that. I know that the DFE is funding a number champions programme for early years, which I think is being rolled out. So I think there is something happening there, which I think is a good thing. I also absolutely agree with Lynne about the shape and space elements of the curriculum and about the qualifications of people that are engaged in looking after early years children and teaching them, because yes, they are much more than childminders, and we need to make sure that they are well equipped to foster young minds, I guess, and that those gaps that start at that point are very, they're something that slows down social equity, I think. In terms of maths to age 18, I'm a huge advocate of maths to age 18. I'm not a huge advocate of making things compulsory. I think it just should be a no-brainer that you study maths to age 18 because it's such a valuable thing that everybody should do. Something that hasn't been mentioned is that there's a qualification called core maths, which is a level 3 qualification, which means that you require a grade 4 or above in GCSE to be ready to take the course. But the idea is that around 300,000 young people each year who get a grade 4 or above in GCSE mathematics stop studying mathematics at age 16. And that is unlike any other developed country. Another issue there is that I talked about us doing quite well in TIMSS and PISA, and better than we've ever done before. And in fact, it's the far eastern countries are the ones that are ahead of us now. But we don't do so well in terms of adult numeracy. And perhaps the fact that people stop studying maths at age 16 generally is a factor in that. And there's good cognitive science evidence to suggest that learning maths for longer enables you to develop mathematics skills and numerical reasoning skills that will stay with you, for the rest of your life and will be very valuable to you. So I think that core maths, I feel at the moment, it was designed to fill the gap for students who had succeeded in GCSE maths but weren't necessarily particularly keen on STEM or really sort of heavily maths involved things, but actually that in order to be able to be an effective citizen, you need to understand a bit about data. You need to be able to understand what mathematical modelling is. When somebody on the television tells you about an R number, it's useful to know what that means. So I think that core maths is something that we've developed, which is really an extremely good programme. At the moment, around 13,000 students do it. So potential for, if you just took the A-level students, so students that are doing A-level programmes who aren't doing A-level maths, 180-odd thousand of them drop maths at age 16. Now, my view is that they should all be doing core maths. And I think that's an area where we really do need to work on improving our provision to keep us up with the rest of the world. And also to going back to Conrad's point, GCSE maths, I suppose you're learning about maths and maths techniques and concepts and things. The ability to apply those concepts in context is another level of skill. And that's what core maths attempts to do, to say, OK, you've learned some fundamental maths. Now let's see how we can use that in the real world.
OK, thank you. Now, the all-important subject of teacher recruitment. Baroness Neuberger.
I ought to declare an interest. My son was a maths teacher.
Could I just check on the Academy of Mathematical Sciences, Chair, please?
Sorry, Lord Stern.
I wanted to just a supplementary question on the Academy of Mathematical Sciences and what.
By all means, I'm sorry, Baroness Neuberger. Yes, by all means, do ask.
Yeah. What do you see, and perhaps it's for Lynne McClure, what do you see as the prospects now that the government has said it's not going to participate in the funding?
Well, obviously, it was a huge blow when DSIT decided that they were not going to be able to give us the 6 million that was predicated originally before the election. I think the amazing thing about the Academy is that it has absolutely surprisingly maybe brought the whole of the mathematical sciences together. So it brings education together with academia, together with business and industry and government. And anybody who knows anything about the way mathematical sciences work thinks that's a minor miracle in itself, bringing all of those groups together. So at the moment, we're being funded as an incorporated charity by the Newton Institute within Cambridge, who are funding 4 posts. That's a CEO delegate, 2 policymakers, and an administrator, and everything else is being done in a voluntary capacity. I think that we've already done some outstanding work. We rewrote the Deloitte's report on the contribution of mathematical sciences to the UK economy, an amazing £495 billion, and it represents 20% of the total UK gross value. So we've already done some really sterling work, which helps people then to use that evidence. We had a maths summit, which brought together all the movers and shakers in order to look at what was going to happen at maths in the future. And a recent thing is to send posters out to secondary schools on Maths Can Take You Anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
In the future, we're working to have a presence in Scotland and in Wales and in Northern Ireland, because this is the Academy is intended to represent all of those. We are talking to private funders. I can't say any more about that, except we do have some who are very interested in supporting us. But as you can imagine, it's rather deflating when you've got to the point when you're ready to do a big launch and then you don't have the money to do that.
We understand. Baroness Neuberger.
Thank you.
So, as I declared an interest, my son's a maths teacher. So this committee has looked at the issue of recruiting and retaining maths teachers and wider STEM subjects before, but we'd like just a quick response on how severe the problem is and what the main barriers are. And then I'm going to move on to retention. But given that we clearly have a huge vacancy rate, it's quite interesting. I think, Charlie Strip, you said that you wanted everybody to be doing core maths who wasn't doing maths A-level. How would we ever do that? So do you want to start, perhaps?
Okay, I'll start. So first of all, around the overall teacher shortage, I think that last year, I think only 63% of the target was met to recruit new maths teachers.
Exactly.
One of the things that affects my work a lot is that lots of the work that the Advanced Maths Support Programme and the Maths Hubs do is around providing professional development for maths teachers, and that professional development is freely available. So it's state-funded professional development, I would say this wouldn't I, but it's a very high standard. It's very well reviewed and people think it's really excellent. One of the problems that we have with it is that sometimes teachers who want to engage with it cannot do so because they cannot be allowed out of their classes because there's such a shortage of teachers. So, and what that does also is it means that teachers, I know you're going to talk about retention a bit later, but it also means that the teachers that we have got are under lots of pressure, and that also affects retention. I think that in a way that affects children is also quite distressing, really, because children in disadvantaged areas are disproportionately affected by teacher shortage. Because if you are a maths teacher, you've got quite a lot of freedom over where you're in demand. So if you're in demand, then it's human nature to want to work in a nice environment, and so some maths teachers are extremely dedicated and will say, I want to go and work in that very tough place. But generally speaking, it's perfectly natural that people wouldn't do that. So that's another thing that kind of adds to disadvantage, the fact that specialist teachers aren't available in some of the most disadvantaged areas. And so there's a whole kind of spiralling issue around all of that. I think that ways in which we can recruit more teachers. I mean, the issue, part of the reason why it's hard to recruit maths teachers is part of the reason why we know maths is so important, is because if you're qualified to be a secondary maths teacher, you're qualified to do lots of other things which are possibly more lucrative and almost certainly easier. So what we need to do is to make the career of being a maths teacher very attractive. One of the things I would say is that there's recent research from NFER that suggests that young graduates are quite pro-social. They want careers where they feel they're doing something worthwhile. And what could be more worthwhile for society than being a maths teacher, I would naturally argue. So I think there is some room for hope there. I think also that you don't need to be a maths graduate to be a secondary maths teacher, but you do need, I think, to have A-level maths and to have done a numerate degree. And I think that we could perhaps spread the net of how we recruit maths teachers as well.
We do, don't we? Because we take people who've done economics.
Yes, that's right. Yes, but I think that, So I think we could be more bullish about that potentially. The other thing that we can do is I think the right thing to call them is out-of-field teachers, teachers who are qualified teachers in other subjects who can then convert to being maths teachers. The NCTM and the Maths Hubs do a programme around that, but it's a programme. It's a very good programme for what it is, but it's 6 days. What would be good would be to have a much more sort of formal, rigorous route for retraining teachers of other subjects to be effective specialist maths teachers. That's another source. Other sources could be teaching is working is becoming much more flexible in many areas of life, isn't it? But teachers are summoned by bells, aren't they? It's a much more rigid structure. If there are ways of maybe allowing more flexible working, perhaps part-time working, perhaps some retired people from the classroom that could perhaps go back into the classroom, those kinds of things might help. But it's something that is really, really urgent to address. And so I'm a great advocate for maths to age 18. In core maths, one of the things about core maths is that it's about how maths is used across the board, and I would like there to be a core maths team in a school or college, and that might include a geography teacher, an economics teacher, a psychology teacher, as well as maths, but working with this common purpose of showing how to use the maths you've learnt pre-16 in context post-16.
Lynne, McClure, do you want to add to that?
Right, Lynne.
Yes, thank you. I think this is not going to be helped by the Labour policy of removing maths opportunity to be able to offer incentives to teachers. I think that's going to have a disproportionate effect on disadvantaged areas. I think the other thing to say is that if we're looking at where maths teachers come from, obviously a lot of them are going to come from people who've done mathematics degrees, and the post-1992 universities are responsible for 17%, or have been responsible for 17% of people going into teaching, whereas the Russell Group universities are responsible for only 2%. And following the news, we know that several universities are now closing their maths departments, and they happen to be the low-tariff universities. Low-tariff universities not requiring an A star, but maybe requiring a B to do maths. Those are the very people who are going to possibly go into mathematics teaching. And so we've got a perfect storm here of low-tariff universities closing their maths department and Russell Groups increasing the number of people that they have doing mathematics, but those people are not going to go, with exceptions, are not going to go into teaching.
I would quite like both of you to talk about the issue about government incentives, the bursaries, extra salary boost, much of which is going to go, how effective that's been, but also what you do about retention. And then I'm going to actually ask Conrad Wolfram what we're going to do about all this. Okay. Do you want to have a quick... And I think we have to be quite quick.
Okay, I'll be quick. So bursaries and things, I think have been quite effective at getting people to sign up to train to be teachers. I'm not sure if they've been very effective at getting people to remain in the profession and be teachers in the long term. So that's what I'd say around that. I think, sorry, there were two parts of your question. So
yes, well, how would you retain?
Okay, how I would retain, I think, is one thing that is an issue, I think, in the way our schools work, is that the way you make career progress and gain status in school, status and salary, is to go into management. Yep. I think that's actually the wrong thing. One of the things that happens in places like Singapore, for example, is they have different tracks for education professionals, and as a subject specialist, you can get a lot of reward and a lot of status, and you can be working with other teachers to support their teaching, all of those things. Now, through the Maths Hubs and through some multi-academy trusts now, we have people who are taking on responsibility for developing their colleagues, thinking about curriculum across a number of schools, all of those things. So these things are almost evolving as more sort of subject-specific career tracks. But it would be great, I think, to make those much more formal and clear, and that there is a way to. I mean, I would argue, in many situations, that somebody who is an excellent teacher in the classroom for maths is more valuable to the country than they are as a manager. And so we need to think about how we can make sure that is recognised.
Lynne, did you want to add anything to that, or do you just agree?
Just to say that Charlie's right. The bursaries have been effective in attracting people to go into teaching, into maths teaching, and that's really good. One of the things that NFER are just about to bring out a new report next week, I think, on maths retention and recruitment. So it might be worth looking out for that. Teacher apprenticeships seem to be really valuable because they don't incur a huge debt. So that's another way of getting teachers in. And for women, I think, especially in primary schools, being able to give them more flexibility, especially women who have young children who find it very difficult to be at school for 8 o'clock in the morning and to stay late in order to finish their work. That doesn't really go down very well with family life. So having more flexibility, especially for women, of course, men should have it too, but especially for women, I think that's a really important thing. And opportunities for sabbaticals. I can remember feeling very jealous when colleagues that I knew were in other sorts of operations, and after they'd done their 7 years, they got at least a term off to go and do something else. Obviously, we don't have enough teachers to do that, but maybe it's deciding which comes first.
Okay. And Wolfram, briefly, how would you fix it?
Well, there's a massive piece of good news. AI is coming on leaps and bounds for tutoring and assessment, and I think it can help a huge amount here. I mean, we're at the cutting edge of deploying sort of hybrid AI with a mixture of computation and generative AI, and the results are incredible. I would say it does a better job, and I'm all for, we need lots of human teachers for all sorts of reasons, but in terms of the actual coaching of traditional maths, which of course I would like to see changed anyway, but the coaching of traditional maths, I think it'll do better than many teachers. And it's there, it's available, it can be deployed everywhere. It's really exciting to watch. What's even more exciting is to see the extent to which it can pull in other contexts, different things that wouldn't be available to teach, particularly in less advantaged schools. Other thing I'd like to say is, the more context you can put in mathematics from the real world, I mean, if we're having this compulsory subject for everyone, it's presumably for a wide range of our population. We need to have teachers from many different contexts deploying the mathematics on their subjects. And so I really do hope that we can pull in teachers from many different subjects to be able to teach. And I think this is possible as we move that forward.
This, I think, is perfect for the next question from Baroness Young, which is about curriculum for the future.
Yes, so perhaps we could start with Conrad. You talked about traditional maths, but obviously times has changed. I learnt my statistics using a slide rule, just goes to show how much technology has changed. Do we really need to teach kids to be able to figure out from scratch, or is that passé?
To a large extent, not. I think we need to go backwards, if you like. So we need to start with what is really happening in the real world, which is calculating is done by computers almost entirely, beyond certainly basic primary level. And that has meant that mathematics is deployed in a vast number of contexts that it wasn't 50, 60, 70 years ago. That's the reason we're also worried about producing people who have mathematical skills. You didn't use it for large-scale medical data analysis. That just didn't exist. It was for physics, for accounting, for things where it happened to work well. So unless we understand from the root up that the subject has fundamentally changed, the curriculum has to fundamentally change, we will be running in the wrong direction to catch up, and that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, put this in context, when I was doing A-level maths, further maths, I had a very good teacher who said maths is the art of avoiding calculation. And he was right. For hundreds of years, that was the sticking point in using this fantastic system of getting answers and decisions. You couldn't calculate. So you spent all your effort learning techniques to try and get round the calculating, effectively. That has been turned on its head more dramatically than I think anything you could point to in human history. We have computers that make calculating incredibly cheap. And so the emphasis now needs to be on harder problems, messier problems, problems that you could use with a vast array of new algorithms. I mean, where is machine learning in the curriculum? It's a critical algorithm for much of the AI that's currently being delivered. Nobody's seen it. If you take a typical student, A-grade student who's done maths and further maths, and you say, here are, I don't know, a few million data points from 2 versions of a website. Tell me which version's performing better. They haven't got a clue where to start. So those are the real sorts of questions that, in a sense, people need to be able to address, and they're miles off. And I think the good news here is the maths that I'm talking about here could be much more endearing to a much larger range of people because they see it from the context that they're interested in. If we can't apply it to the context, the application of maths now, both defining the question, abstracting it, getting the computation done, typically by a computer, and interpreting the result and not being fooled by it, those are very hard. They're high concept, they're difficult, they need a lot of experience, and they need experience of actual real problems you're going to address. Unless we get that in education, it'll fail. And frankly, that's why it is failing to some extent. And just to be clear, you often learn completely the wrong thing at the moment. You learn the wrong kinds of algorithms, the wrong approach, because, for example, and I slightly caustically put out a blog post, I think early in the pandemic, about the exam grade fiasco. Now, if you look at really what went wrong, it was a detailed expose, in my view, of the authorities being hoisted by their own petard of lack of computational understanding and thinking. So they tried to strip out much of the data so they could make the calculating simple, so then they could come up with a simple answer as to what the model was. Totally the wrong approach. But that is the approach that we teach people now because it's all predicated on that. So we've got the wrong algorithms, the wrong approach. I think we're putting a lot of good people off because if they don't happen to be good at calculating, but they are interested in computation mathematics, some of those people just go adrift. They'd say, I'm not interested in the abstraction of this. I don't happen to be a person interested in maths itself. So off I go, and I'm not doing it. Again, I think we're slightly deluding ourselves over A-level popularity. I don't know, my definition of popular would include really keen to do it and excited by it, not semi-coerced. And I think at the moment the problem is we're telling people, if you don't do maths A-level, you can't get into a decent university, you're kind of stuffed for all sorts of things you might want to do in life. A bit like we told people about Latin in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. And again, there is a real subject out there we really need. Let's align them.
Well, Lucas, sorry, Baroness Young, do you want to finish? Lord Lucas is going to follow up, I think, but you've got more to ask.
Yeah, I mean, are we in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Are there whole cohorts of people out there who actually need to be able to check their bookie slip and make sure that their supermarket bill adds up and sort out their bank account? But let me ask Charlie to, and Lynne.
Okay, so I've got a lot of sympathy with a lot of what Conrad said, but I think also that Conrad says it's like towards the end of primary school that it stops being relevant. I think that to get a grade, a pass grade in GCSE maths, a 4 or 5, possibly even a 6 in GCSE maths, certainly 4 or 5, you have a strong understanding of number, proportional reasoning, and graphs. You will achieve that, and I think that everybody needs that. I don't think you can suddenly say that isn't relevant for exactly the reasons you just said. In order to function as a citizen in day-to-day life and in basic things that we do in society, we do need to have a strong understanding of number and proportional reasoning and be able to interpret graphs and things. If we don't have that, then we're hamstrung. But I do think that it's really important that all of the digital technology and the rapid movement that we're having in advances in technology, engineering, science, all of those things are driven by using maths with big data. And I think that we should be amending the curriculum, certainly post-16, possibly post 14, to be starting to think about that. And how
do we need new courses, or do we need the existing courses changed?
Okay, so one thing that MEI does is that we like to try to get our hands dirty trying things out. And so something that we've done is we've had a data sciencey type course. It's just certificated by MEI. It doesn't have sort of real currency, but about 1,000 students have done it so far, and they're A-level maths students. But they're doing this course. What's great about it is that Warwick University, for example, they can't compel people to do it, but they say if you're doing that's a really good thing to do. So that's being done alongside A-level. But think about A-level maths itself. I wouldn't want to say we need another subject. I want to say we need to. I would not say we need another A-level and call it something different. I think we do need to change what's there, because lots of what if you go to do a maths degree, for example, and you can't code, then you're at a massive disadvantage, because there's a kind of expectation that you should be able to. And universities spend a lot of time teaching people how to code. They should have done that at school. So I think I would want to make A-level maths much more digital, if you like, or computational, perhaps is the word that Conrad would prefer. But that's something that needs to be a worry I always have. I heard Lynne quoting Tim Oates earlier. One of the things I worry about is if we're going to make these changes, what we need to do is to have a proper kind of reasoned look at this. We need an independent panel of expert people to think about planning how to change the curriculum for the long term and how to implement it. Something we need cross-party consensus over, to say this is so important. So I think the fundamental maths, everybody needs that. What you need to get a good pass in GCSE, we can argue about quadratics and things, of course we can, but I feel that is essential everywhere for everybody, but we can do a lot more with the curriculum.
Thank you. Lynne, do you want to add anything to what you've just been hearing?
Yes, if I could just look at those who are at the lower end of the spectrum and are not looking to do mathematical sciences in the future or even apply their mathematical sciences, but need basic numeracy in order to be confident and competent citizens. And I think that's where where GCSE is not fit for purpose. I mean, even if you get a grade 4, you can cherry pick the sorts of questions that you're going to do, and you still can't plan a journey or interrogate your pay packet. These things are not routinely part of what students do. And so one of the things that the Maths Futures, and I know there's a question on Maths Futures coming up, one of the things that the Maths Futures suggested was that there should be some sort of qualification that would be for everybody, because everybody needs to be numerate and needs to be able to to take part in civil society. And that should be, instead of being norm referenced, which is what GCSEs are, which means that there will always be between a third and 40% of people failing, because it's norm reference. It's always the bottom of the curve that don't get their grade 4. Instead of being norm referenced, it should be criterion referenced, a bit like a driving test. So if you can do it, then you get the grades. And I think that has some data in it, and it also has some of the AI stuff that Conrad was talking about, but that's quite a small amount. It's about the interpretation of those things and being able to make evaluation of those things rather than doing complicated computation.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to move on. We've got quite a number of questions coming. Lord Lucas, you want to ask, I think, a supplementary to this subject?
Yes, would we benefit from having as it were, a music exam structure, small increments, lots of diversity, making it easy and fun to carry on learning and recognised? At the moment, you've just got GCSE. No one wants to go back and do GCSE. Couldn't we have something that really engaged people? And Lynne's organisation could be running that, couldn't it?
Lynne, would you like to comment?
Interestingly, I had a conversation with the Gates Foundation last week, and they are looking to do just this, have a sort of a set of badges that you acquire so that you can do incremental pieces of mathematics and then gradually grow your knowledge. I don't know whether that's too difficult for us to do, but it would be really interesting to look at it, and I'm sure we'd get much more engagement.
Conrad?
I did, in fact, propose, along with others, this just before the pandemic, exactly this sort of music grade structure. I think music grades work very well because people mostly take them when they're able to, and they mostly pass them and do quite well at them. and there are various things to go up. And we in fact laid out a way in which you could do this and where it could become more specialist higher up. So I'm very much in favour of a structure like that. And also, I think, just to be clear here, we need a massive change in content and curriculum later on. Now, whether that's a structure that can happen within the current A-level, or whether it has to be an additional A-level, I'm not sure. That's a question but we're talking 80% computers, things that work very, very differently from currently. So I think it's been a real struggle to do anything other than incremental improvements in the past in the setups we've got.
Charlie?
I would like there to be a kinder assessment structure for mathematics. I think that the kind of high-stakes nature of things like GCSE maths and high stakes for the school as well as for the pupil, which puts lots of pressure on teachers and on children and it turns people off maths. I mean, we have a sort of talk about people being very anxious about maths and being intimidated by it. That sort of high-stakes exam structure is part of that. So I think if we could find a way of examining maths, or examining is that the right word, but certainly showing students progress in maths and being clear about what, for them and us to be clear about what they know and understand in a way which is kinder to their progression would be another thing that happens is that Lynne alluded to is there's lots of teaching to the test that goes on, which means that it's almost like the function of maths education is to get a grade 4 or above in GCSE. I mean, many parents and children believe that. I sometimes think many teachers think that as well. We should be thinking about, there are these really valuable knowledge and skills that I want to acquire that are going to be really useful to me. And is there a way that I can be led through that through an assessment system within education? So yes, I have some sympathy with that, certainly.
Baroness Willis wants to come in with a question.
Very quick question. Earlier on you said that there are other countries like China that do much, much better in terms of the attainment in maths. So what can we learn from them? Have they got this system, or are they following Conrad's approach?
No, that they are following, well, as Conrad said, Timms and Pease assess old maths, if you like, as well. But what they do in the Far East is they teach for deep conceptual understanding. So rather than teaching rules and tricks to get answers, they teach for much more deep understanding of maths and relationships and connections within mathematics. And something that we're doing through the work of the NCTM particularly is we did some work with Shanghai with exchange visits and things, and we thought about how we can develop that pedagogy back here in England. And Lynne earlier talked about primary maths and actually being in a pretty good state at the moment. I think that we've done a lot to really improve primary maths teaching, and that is improving secondary maths teaching as well. But it's a kind of different question to the issue that Conrad is talking about.
I mean, these countries are playing an incredibly good game and winning at that. It's the wrong game on the wrong playing field, long term.
Right.
Okay, we've got quite a lot more questions, so I'm going to ask everybody to be as brief as they can, please, both the questioners and the witnesses. So Baroness Neville-Jones is going to ask the next question.
I've got a question about what I describe as the lame ducks. How do you help people who've fallen behind? Seems to me that some of the answers we were just getting to Lord Lucas's question may be relevant. But given the existing system, which clearly has considerable shortcomings, what advice would you give to people who do need more maths and are not getting it, and what schools can do actually to bring them up so that having not understood earlier concepts, they can nevertheless progress? Who would like to tackle that?
I'll start if you like. Okay, so one of the things that happens in Shanghai and other Far Eastern jurisdictions is that teachers have much less contact time. What it means is that they can diagnose very quickly if a child has not grasped the point of a lesson and can make sure, therefore, by early intervention, that almost before the next lesson, that conceptual misstep, if you like, has been corrected. But what we're doing here around that, and through the work of the NCTM, we've got a program called Mastering Number, which is it's at Key Stage, it's early Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 as well, which really helps to embed the kind of the fluency and confidence with number in primary children, and that's a program that's been pretty successful. Something else that we've introduced just this year actually is that following COVID particularly, it seems that at Key Stage 2, that's at the end of primary, the tail of underachievement has got longer and deeper, and so what we've been doing with secondary schools is we've got is a program called Securing Foundation Year 7 that a large number of schools are involved in, which is really helping secondary teachers to, if you're a secondary teacher, you don't really know much about teaching basic number and things, but if you've got children coming up to you that need that support. So the idea is that, and again, schools implement it in different ways, but some schools actually provide extra classes that have been, and they've been designed, research-informed pedagogy to try to help those children to fill those gaps. But it is one of the problems with, and the nature of mathematics, that if you miss out on key things, then everything can suddenly seem completely meaningless, and that's why people have such a bad time.
I just want to add to that. It's the nature of calculating. It's not totally the nature of broader real-world mathematics. That's more of a scaffolding than a ladder, perhaps, because you've got layers, but they're not contiguous in exactly the same way as you would. Yeah. Look, AI
we've got a system at the moment that makes it a ladder.
Yes. Yeah. And mostly on this, and as you say, if somebody starts lost, they more or less stay lost. Yeah. And the teaching has a huge consequence. I think I've experienced it with my own daughter. It's very easy for misdiagnosis to happen, and it can be highly detrimental. I do think AI has quite a lot to help with this. I think that if people understood what they were aiming at, because there was context, it would make it much better. So the longer range thing here is more context, makes it much better for people to understand what they're aiming at and not get lost in some abstract detail. But people confuse all sorts of things, like, adding fractions. There's a procedure you're following, basically, and you miss the lesson about which way you added fractions. And then they get labelled with they're not good at numeracy. These are extremely confused labels that sometimes occur. And I think we need to do much better at the diagnosis, and I think the AI can help with that. We can't solve it, it can help.
Lynne, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, just briefly, I think that this needs to be something that is done really intensively at primary school, and especially in disadvantaged areas. There is a huge gap of 8 to 9 months of primary students in disadvantaged areas. There was a really good project called Every Child Counts, which trained people specifically in supporting small people to get really good at number and at shape and space. And that had quite a profound effect. But that, of course, as with lots of things, goes on for a while and then it gets stopped. But these ideas of working really intensively with small children so that they don't get to the point where they are behind. If we put in that stuff really early, then that's going to have more impact than trying to help 11 and 12-year-olds who've had 7 years of not understanding.
As a practical matter, is this doing this during the normal lesson, or is this a question of extra teaching? I mean,
usually what happens is a very small group would be taken out to work intensively during the time that when the others are doing maths as well.
I see.
Baroness Northover.
Well, we've covered some of these areas, or touched upon some of these areas, and this is about attainment gaps. And the first part was, what evidence base do we have for this? But it seems to me that you've actually addressed that. And you've made reference to differences between different regions and different groups, and perhaps we could dig into that a little bit more. And the programmes put in place, or that should be put in place, and Lynne has just made reference to that. But coming on, how do we address the gender divide in maths, both in terms of perception and the uptake of A-level, something again which Lynne made reference to, and then the wider global question about what we can learn from high-performing countries. The UK, of course, particularly under Michael Gove, was looking in that direction. And one of you said that there are all sorts of benefits, and Conrad, or at least Charlie, said that there were all sorts of pluses there, and Conrad said that they were on the wrong track. So I want to dig into some of those things. Now, I realise the shortage of time, and so maybe you'll be able to take up the bits where you have particular expertise. So can I actually come to you, Conrad, first for the last part, and what you meant about being on the wrong track, and then come to the others?
Look, we're measuring, the metrics we're using are, we've got an ecosystem where we're measuring with exams what I consider largely the wrong subject, because it's not what you really need in life. That's affecting all sorts of things about which groups do it well and badly. I think there are lots of things I could say, but briefly, I think that leading with abstraction in mathematics is a disaster for disadvantaged groups on average, because what it does, if you're from a sort of academic background, you're used to hearing lots of abstraction happen. If you're not, and it's not relevant to your life apparently, what you're learning, you're more likely to tune out quick. It doesn't mean you're not good at it. It just means that you've started in the wrong place. And if you happen to be excited about the mathematics itself, that's wonderful, off you go. If you're not, which is most of the population, and I think possibly disproportionately affects girls, if you're more interested in the context, how you could use it to work something out, than it itself, than the machinery inside, then I think you're left not wanting to do mathematics and upset about it. So I think that's a key point. And if you look at countries, Britain can't lead by just copying what everybody else has done around the world, right? We could lead in this area by deciding that there's a major change that no other country has done. If you take a Singapore or something like that, they, as Charlie and Lynne know much better than me, they have a very sophisticated way in which you learn the existing hand calculating based subject. And there are many things I'm sure we can learn from that. But in the end, you've got to start from the right subject. And however well you teach it, the wrong subject, it won't make it right. I think everybody is disadvantaged at the moment by not matching with the real world. And I think, there are nuances between that. I think that high context start of mathematics will really improve some of the groups we're most worried about not doing well at mathematics, where they can start from what they're interested in. And each piece of mathematics has many, many contexts. That's the whole beauty of mathematics. You can use it to work out answers from many, many different contexts. Let's have a plethora of contexts that people can choose between to learn their mathematics.
Lynne.
So I'd like to talk about girls. So we know that girls don't do as well. What tends to happen is that they do better at GCSE, but they don't do as well at A level. And there are fewer girls doing maths at A level now. And I think that is probably a result of the policy decision to remove AS as a contributory factor to A level, because we know that lots of girls tried out AS to see whether maths was the thing that they wanted to do. Now that AS doesn't count towards A level, that has been taken away. But there are lots of things going on. So there is, for example, Maths for Girls, which is a fantastic charity that puts high-performing women into schools, telling them about their maths career and how they got to where they are. And they're all nice young women that the students can identify with. The maths schools, which we haven't mentioned anything about the maths schools, but the maths schools are going to be, hopefully, 11 schools geographically spread over the UK, which are looking at quite often children with neurodivergent abilities. These are students who are absolutely passionate about maths brought together. And I chair the governing body of the Cambridge Maths School, and it's quite obvious that girls don't think that they are as good at maths and that they have as much chance of getting into such a school. So we have been doing lots of girls-only events, bringing girls together. And that seems to have had quite a positive effect on our recruitment.
Charlie, we're reaching nearly the end of our time. Can you be very brief?
I can. I can talk about girls particularly. So maths A level, 40% girls, 60% boys. Lynne implied it's getting worse. Actually, not significantly worse. I don't think it's been very stable for a long time. As numbers have grown, girls' numbers have grown as well as boys. They've grown in the same proportion. Further maths, it's 30% girls, 70% boys. Core maths, interestingly, it's roughly 50-50. And that's the nature of the subject is rather different. TIMSS and PISA data show that we have unusually wide gender gap in achievement in maths. And again, Lynne talks about GCSE. Actually, at the higher grades, girls don't do as well as boys in GCSE maths either. We commissioned some research around this through the AMSP a few years ago from the Institute of Education. The conclusion of that research was that they looked at some schools and colleges, for example, where there wasn't such a gender gap. And the conclusion was it's not something that you can do within the maths classroom. It's about the culture of the institution, the culture of the school, perhaps the culture of our society is the way that we need to address that. I'm not sure, but it's certainly noteworthy that cool maths is it's about something other than maths, if you like, and that does seem to be more attractive to girls. And I was hearing what Conrad was saying, so there's an example there. But I think the key thing is that it's a deeper cultural thing that we can't just fix by saying, what can you do in maths to change this? It's a wider thing than that was the conclusion that research suggested.
Thank you. Lord Ranger, the last question.
Yes, I think, firstly, I want to thank all the witnesses. It's been riveting hearing your perspectives and the common sense requirements. But it sort of comes to the question, which is this session probably will result in a letter going to government on conclusions and recommendations. And it feels like if there was a reality TV show, it'd be how do we solve a problem like teaching maths in the UK? But the points you've been raising have pretty much been around the why, the how, and the what. And if you could just briefly say, what would be your 3 priorities each? If you could just summarise in those sort of how, why, what, that you would want in that recommendation to the letter of how do we solve this problem? Because I know we've covered a large landscape, and I know you may feel free to repeat yourselves, because I think you have touched on this in some of your answers.
So very briefly, please, 3 priorities from each of you.
So I would set up a criterion-based numeracy qualification that everybody has to do, so that we raise the bar for everybody. I would make sure that we have a policy for AI and technology in schools, so that we're not wasting money, but we have a proper structure to do that. And also I would set up a qualifications and curriculum authority, much as QCA used to be, so that there is a reservoir of knowledge which is continued from time to time, and allows curriculum to be designed by people who really understand and know what they're talking about.
Thank you. Charlie, your 3 priorities.
Okay. I'd say I'd reform GCSE maths so that I would have 2 GCSEs, one which was really the fundamental maths everybody needs for work and life, and people would learn that properly. I'd have a second one which is thinking about going on to further study in maths and numerical-based things. And I'd want to introduce that relatively quickly. I'd really want to try to address the maths teacher shortage, and I think that more formalised career structures, looking at pay, all of those things need to be done, because if we don't do that, I feel that there's a danger that the gains that we've made will be lost. I think it's that critical. And I think the last thing is, around post-16 maths, I would really want to work with industry and with other experts in the field around how maths is used, to try to incorporate, develop A-level maths and further maths so that they were more appropriate for what young people will be encountering outside of education. Because at the moment they're in a little bit of a bubble, and they're a badge that you get, but they're not necessarily something that you could have an equally good badge that was actually more useful for your progression.
Thank you. Conrad, your 3 priorities.
We need, in my view, an alternative A-level, a computer-based maths or a computational thinking A-level, where it is agreed with particularly top universities that it is an equivalent admissions process value for maybe not maths itself, but for all of the dependent subjects, STEM and beyond. And that needs to be, computers need to be in exams and assumed as part of that. And that's absolutely essential. And establishing the incentive for schools to take it, exam boards to offer it, all of that needs to be done. The ecosystem is currently completely stuck with respect to subject change. I think we need to have a sort of subject vision stream function, I don't know whether that lives in the DFE, where the idea of the subject change looking forwards to our AI age is considered and funded, and exemplars for that are funded, as distinct from what's happening next term or the problems of the day in running schools. As I say, finally, we need computers in exams for calculating like people have in real life.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all 3 witnesses for your very comprehensive evidence. It's been very interesting and informative for us. Yeah, you are welcome to stay for the second session that's about to start on adult numeracy and functional mathematics. And if you have any follow-up evidence, then please send them to us. But thank you, all three of you, very much. And we're going to now pause the broadcast while So welcome to the second panel session of this inquiry, this short evidence inquiry on mathematics education. I'm very pleased to welcome our witnesses. We have Alex Stevenson, Deputy Director of Learning and Work Institute, Sam Sims, Chief Executive of National Numeracy, and Bobby Seagull, a maths teacher, broadcaster and writer. You're all very welcome. What I would like to do is to kick off with the first question. Could you set out for us some of the evidence that is around adult numeracy in the UK? And how severe are the gaps that we're talking about? And what provision currently exists to help people learn these numeracy skills? We'd like to hear from all three of you. Bobby, would you like to start?
Yes. So my name is Bobby Seagull. I'm a maths teacher, TV broadcaster, and ambassador for the charity National Numeracy. So I've actually been teaching in schools since 2014. So for 10 years, secondary and sixth forms, and I was a lead at lead of maths at a secondary school, and also running CPD, continuing professional development for teachers. But as of September, I'm now part-time the specialist of maths at a local primary school, so hopefully seeing the whole perspective of kids from 5 to 18. So just very briefly, my story with maths is that I've had a positive relationship with maths and numbers ever since I've been a child. But actually, initially it started through two things: football stickers, the stats in there, and cricket stats. They got me into maths. And then at university I did maths and economics. And again, if you're a maths qualified graduate, in my 20s I actually worked in the city. I was a trader at Lehman Brothers. I won't say much about that choice. And then at Nomura, and then actually qualified at PwC as a chartered accountant. But at PwC is where I had my sort of epiphany at the age of 30. So I was teaching graduates there, and I thought, actually, I love this. I love communicating ideas to people. So I changed careers, went back to uni, started my teacher training, my master's, started my doctorate, haven't finished it, on maths anxiety, and then obviously I was on University Challenge, went viral for enthusiasm, and I now use it as a platform to be a vocal advocate for maths, which is why I'm probably here. So the evidence base around adult numeracy. So with National Numeracy and Sam, we work quite closely together. Their headline stat is that 1 in 2 adults have the numeracy skills we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And obviously in the first panel you had Conrad talking about is hand calculation important, but I still think young people and adults do need that sort of number sense. And I'll give you an example of a question that National Numeracy set to adults, and they said you can even use a calculator, and they said, can you work out if you're earning £9 an hour, can you increase this by 5%? So £9 an hour, can you increase this by 5%? Again, you can use people can use their phones or calculators, and again, simple method that most of my students would use is work out 10%, 90p, half of that, 5%, 45p, add it on 945. And that's a straightforward question. And yet, National Numeracy have found generally that sort of question, 1 in 2 adults, so that's in England, 17 million adults of working age population would struggle with that question. So obviously, we need to think about maths at a higher level, in terms of offering opportunities for AI and computation. But at the other end, we've got this dearth of masses of people that have no sense of numeracy. And I remember once, just anecdotally, again, a parent telling me, oh, Mr. Seagull, these payday loans companies, one of them offered me 30%. Should I go for the one that's 40%? That's better. So again, they can't let alone do the calculation, but they don't even understand the implication of numbers. So I think clearly there are huge gaps with adult numeracy. Because obviously we start at the bottom at GCSE, where 1/3 to 40%, depending on your perspective, they're told at 16 you cannot do maths, and it ends up being half of the UK adult population that generally have maths phobia and maths literacy.
Thank you. Sam, what do you think the gaps are?
Thank you. I'm Sam Sims. I'm the Chief Executive of the charity National Numeracy, which works to build and support people to build their confidence and their skills with numbers in order to open up opportunities throughout people's lives so that people can have brighter futures. That's what our mission is all about. I have a background working in across educational organisations in the charity sector. When we look at those gaps, as Bobby says, around half of people, adults, struggle. We've got some good data points for those. In the UK, we have things like Skills for Life studies, but also more recently some OECD data, particularly focused on England, in fact, which shows that 52% of people are at or below the OECD level 2, which is equivalent to our entry level 3 here. That's equivalent, as Bobby says, to someone leaving school, an 11-year-old, leaving primary school as an 11-year-old. That figure puts us pretty average, a little bit above the average actually, against OECD countries, but pretty profound in terms of holding back half of adults, and we see that right across the UK. We heard earlier how about 30%, around 30% of young people fail to achieve a pass at GCSE maths at age 16 in particular, and that contributes to around 17 million adults in the UK not having that GCSE in maths. Our research at National Numeracy shows that the strongest predictor of somebody's numeracy level is their socio-economic background, and that's using the proprietary UK Numeracy Index that we developed with Experian. And the next strongest factor, again, further to the earlier panel, is gender, actually, when we look at that. Research that we published just last year shows that overall, women are significantly less confident with numbers than men, and are disproportionately affected by negative experiences of maths at school, particularly when it comes to this confidence issue. And we see that in the PIAC OEC data as well. We see a big difference when it comes to gender there. The implications are that too many people emerge from school not having the basics in place to be able to function in their everyday lives, the things that absolutely everybody needs to make good decisions, solve problems, manage our finances, support the children in our care. It contributes to things like earnings. There's a big earnings gap, a wage gap, as much as £25 billion each and every year when it comes to adults with low numeracy, just compared to if they were to have basic numeracy. That's about £1,700 per year per person across the UK. And we see that this lower numeracy results in a much bigger negative career impact across all areas of careers, so earnings, career development and progression within careers as well. It increases vulnerability to debt, to fraud, to financial exclusion, the data shows. So it has these huge implications across every aspect of our lives. In terms of what exists to do something about this, I think it's really important when it comes to adults to say that it's primarily a demand-side issue. There's actually quite a lot for adults. If you're ready to learn, you're ready to re-engage or engage with maths learning, there's quite a lot available to you. What we do have a problem with is people who have struggled, perhaps experienced 12 years of failure, and what that results in, the low confidence, maths anxiety. What doesn't exist really very well is the steps to get people started, to build their confidence, to take the first steps towards building their skills. And that's where I think we still have a really big gap.
Thank you. I think we're coming on to that in some of our later questions. Alex, would you like to add to what you've heard? In particular, what kind of skills are we referring to when we're talking about functional numeracy, maths for life? Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Alex Stevenson, Deputy Director at the Learning and Work Institute. We're an independent policy and research organisation dedicated to lifelong learning and better work. And before working there, I was also working in further education colleges as a curriculum manager, including for adult numeracy provision. So I very much agree with and endorse what my colleagues on the panel have already said. But in summary, we think that there are too many adults who don't have the numeracy skills needed for life and work, and that holds people back from opportunities in work and other aspects of their life. We're not investing enough in adult skills, including in adult numeracy skills, and the numbers of adults participating in adult numeracy learning are in a sharp decline over the past decade, and there isn't enough focus in policy at the moment to turn some of that around. So to dig into some of the detail on that, I won't rehearse the OECD data that Sam mentioned, but it's very useful to have that recent survey from the OECD. And one of the most concerning things that jumps out from it is that whilst there have been some improvements in performance since the last survey a decade ago, most of that improvement has been driven by an increase in performance of the top performers, and the lowest achievers' skills levels have remained unchanged in that time over the past decade. So that's something that we're really concerned about. In terms of the provision available, I mentioned declining participation, and in 23-24, adult participation in numeracy learning was around 23,000 adults. That's down by 2/3 on what the figure was a decade earlier. And public funding for adult skills through the Adult Skills Fund has fallen by 2/3, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. I don't have a breakdown for how much of that goes specifically on adult numeracy, but this is the budget that funds that provision, and you can see some of the impact of that in the falling participation figures. So that means that a lot of people are missing out on very much the kinds of skills that Bobby was talking about. We are talking about the skills needed in life and work to compare prices, understand medicinal instructions, everyday financial skills, everyday skills for the workplace like measuring ratios, those kinds of things. So really foundational skills for life and for work.
Thank you. Lord Drayson.
Can you tell us about the new Labour government's policy on adult numeracy and whether or not there have been any important policy developments over the past 9 months?
Who would like to start on that? Sam.
Well, I think we heard a little earlier about a focus on a greater focus from the new government on early years and on primary education as well, which I think is really positive. I think when we look at some of the challenges that we have around the link between educator confidence and skill and parental and carer confidence and skill and those of young people, and when those gaps start to appear, it is very, very young. It's a crucial part and stage in someone's young journey to be able to develop early shape, measure, number, all of those aspects. So we see a stronger focus on those early years, boosted investment into programs like Maths Champions, which I think is doing fantastic work around those things. We need to see much more of this. I think it is an important area of work. When we look at why people struggle, as adults, there is a big link intergenerationally. I don't think we can simply work on either young people or work to support adults. We have to recognise the connections between the two. And at National Numeracy, we really see those connections when it comes to low confidence, low skills, maths anxiety. Often those are passed intergenerationally, and that's backed up by the research. So a focus on early years practitioners, early parents, carers, fantastic focus, I think, really important focus. That's something that we've seen. But we have also seen, as panellists spoke of earlier, some changes in policy around requirements of qualifications. I think we have to be really careful around those, around not requiring maths qualifications in early years education, for example, or linked to apprenticeships. I think we have to make sure that whilst we give more flexibility, more responsibility to early year settings and actually to employers around apprenticeships, we also have to make sure that we don't forget that every single one of us needs confidence to use numbers and the skills to use basic numeracy throughout our lives in whichever job we do. So it's not a case of removing those and not replacing it with anything. Flexibility is good, but we need to have this strong focus on building numeracy for everybody.
Alex, would you like to comment on government policy towards numeracy?
Yes, thank you. I do think that there's been quite a limited focus of policy development on adult skills and numeracy in particular since the government came into office. It has been positive to see some mention of adult literacy and numeracy in the first Skills England report, but we don't yet know enough about what Skills England is going to be doing to really know any more than that. I believe that there is also a commitment to maintain the statutory entitlement to fully funded maths provision up to level 2 for adults, which is a positive. But beyond that, most of the policy development has been focused on the growth and skills levy. We think that it should be possible to use the non-apprenticeship element of the skills levy to support adult numeracy training in the workplace. And I agree with Sam that when it comes to things like the inclusion of functional skills maths within apprenticeships for adults, then it was a mistake to remove that requirement because if you look at apprenticeships in comparison with other countries, we already have far less general education within apprenticeships, and we should be increasing that. And if there are challenges around the delivery, we should be investing to solve those problems and learning about what works rather than watering down standards. So we don't think that that's the solution in the case of apprenticeships.
Thank you. Bobby, anything on government policy?
So, generally, again, when the government came in, there was a national numeracy event where I think the current education secretary said she wanted to break down barriers to opportunity, and she said numeracy and maths is a critical part of that. And also, there's two pieces to that. Again, as a school teacher, I welcome the focus on early years, because again, having seen maths from 5 to 18, the sad reality is I can probably, as most teachers, if someone's in year 7 on their first day, you can probably tell that that child is going to pass maths GCSE at 11, and that probably stems from their experience at school maths when they're in their early years. I think Lynne mentioned the stat about 40% of the sort of outcomes can be predicted early on. So I think, any of that maths trauma early on, but I do want to see more from the government in terms of adult maths, because again, part of that cycle is these children that experience maths difficulty at school go on to become parents. We'll talk about later about cultural attitudes. They'll tell their children maths isn't important, you don't need numeracy, and that cycle starts again and again. So actually, we need to focus on the early years, which I'm welcoming, but also the adults. We can't ignore them. I don't feel there's been enough there.
Okay, Baroness Willis.
So you've partly answered this question anyway about sort of the Multiply programme and adult numeracy. And I slightly want to tweak the question, because with the previous session and this one, I'm trying to work out what our ultimate aim is. Is it to increase the number of people who are numerate, or to change the programme so it's more relevant to what the tools and technologies that people have in front of them to be able to then address some of these questions? The question you said about the 40% earlier on in terms of your loans is a really interesting one. But I think part of the thing is, my own experience of tools people is, they don't know how to use the tools they have, even their phone, in order to address that question. So what ultimately does good look like in this space? Is it having 90% of people more numerate, or is it that people have the technologies and know how to use it? And if so, have we got the wrong systems in place to do that? So I ask you to, because it's this second part of the question of are there successful models that we should adopt, that where other people are doing this?
If I may, I think an aspiration we should have for all people, we can start with young people and come on to adults here, but we should expect that every young person leaving the education system, becoming an adult, should have the basic numeracy skills in place to be able to support them throughout their lives. Make no mistake, they're going to need those, whatever job, managing their money, working, functioning on a day-to-day basis, and that they should have the confidence to be able to use those skills. When we often talk about using technology, we're often talking about the number confidence, the numeracy, to actually be able to engage with that, to do so reasonably, to make an assessment about what's coming back at us. So we should have that aspiration that every young person leaves education with those things in place. Sadly, that's not the case. We know that half of working age people in the country don't have that in place, and that's a real issue. I think the place that we need to start for everyone is ensuring those basic building blocks are in place, and the confidence, as I say, to use them. What we see is the strongest precursor to improving skills is improving confidence.
Can I just sort of push a bit further on that? Is improving skills through changing the way that we teach? From what Wolfram was saying, I think he's suggesting a radical rethink of the way that we teach in order that more people get the right skills.
I think there's a couple of things there. One is, and it's a point that came up earlier, is what are we teaching towards? Is it towards passing an exam? Is it towards passing an exam, or is it giving us the skills that we need for life? I think we do need a radical overhaul, because we need to ensure that everyone has those skills for life. What we're very good at doing is comparing young people when it comes to GCSE. What we're not very good is equipping them with the confidence or skills that they need for life. So there does need to be a major change. I think secondly, when it comes to adults, often when we're talking about adult skills when it comes to maths, generally supporting people with low numeracy, millions of people with low numeracy, our go-to solution particularly in policy and government policy, is let's put on more courses, let's give more things to do, let's make it freely available, let's make it convenient. All those things are good, but it's not a supply issue. If you've spent 12 years at least of your life really struggling, experiencing failure, not believing that you can improve. And in fact, when you look at the very successful education systems like in Finland, for example, when it comes to maths, you see strong focus on self-efficacy, belief, having a growth mindset, really fostering these things, first of all, before we go anywhere near offering people and expecting people to take courses, because, as we just heard from Alex, they're not taken up in any great numbers and they're not completed. And that's another thing we see. We need to not forget about those first steps, building confidence, engaging people, getting them started.
Thank you. Bob, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so on the whole concept of, again, we've got this exam at 16, theory, if you get GCSE, you're enumerate, but the problem is that maths is a skill. Imagine you pass your driving test at 17 and then you're not driven a car for 50 years, and someone's like, oh, can you drive? You've probably forgotten the skill. So I think there's a difference between exams, so that children can progress to the next stage of their sort of academic tree, and actually having the numeracy skills so you can function, as Sam says, be confident and competent in using maths and numeracy in day-to-day life. And thinking about the bigger picture, what Conrad talked about, the relevance of the education system. Again, I feel like our education system is a bit of a relic from the Victorian era. You know, children still in my classes, they sit in rows, sometimes in tables if you're being creative, and I'll stand at the front, explain percentages, do a few examples, then the children will learn that. They'll do a few examples, a few questions, and that's still pretty much what it was in the Victorian era. So there's definitely a case for wholesale change, but again, can you change a whole system overnight? Tricky. Yeah. But if you're looking at piecemeal change, definitely, like I think, we'll come to it later, but using AI technology to make teachers' lives better and also to make the learning better for the children and adults.
Alex, do you want to add anything to what you've heard?
Yes, please. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think we need to do a bit of both, really. So one of the ways in which we're an outlier compared to other countries is that our adult system for math skills is very focused on the achievement of qualifications, and that's not always an engaging offer to adults who are turned off by a negative experience at school. So things like the Multiply programme have been really helpful in diversifying that learning offer for adults and providing more informal opportunities for learning, where you can work on people's confidence, you can engage them with aspects of financial literacy. Those kinds of learning opportunities, I think, are really, really valuable alongside qualifications for those who want to go back and get them. And then, so on the sort of more but we do need to promote those opportunities as well. So the declines in participation, I mean, our research on adult participation in learning shows that only 2 in 5 adults are aware that you can get a free course in maths, and the people who are least likely to be aware are people who haven't participated in learning recently, have the lowest levels of qualifications, and so they're the people who are most likely to benefit from support. So we could, if you think back to the 2000s, we had big national promotional campaigns around learning, literacy and numeracy skills, so we can start to create a bit of a culture around lifelong learning. But I do think that the content side is important as well, and making those hooks relevant to the kinds of things that are likely to engage adults in learning, because the first thing that we have to do before we can worry about the content or the teaching methods too much is actually get adults into the classroom. So we need to overcome some of those barriers and sell courses around things that matter to people, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's the skills to support your children at school through family learning, whether it's budgeting and household accounts. Those are the kinds of things that are more likely to engage adults, rather than saying, oh, we know that we noticed you haven't got a GCSE, would you like to come back and get it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Baroness Walmsley.
Thank you. I tend to think of the adult numeracy workforce as the people who rescue the situation and sort out the mess after people have left school without functional numeracy. Now, we've heard about the challenges for getting enough workforce in schools of the right kind to
make sure they don't land up in that situation as adults. But I'd like to really explore how well providers can recruit and retain the right sort of people to do the adult numeracy, because it could be that there are additional skill sets needed there, apart from obviously the knowledge, the mathematical knowledge and the demagogy. There may be other skills that providers look for. So could you say anything about the difficulties of retaining the sorts of people, or recruiting and retaining the sort of people that can do that? And can I also ask, is there a role for people who are not currently professionals in that role, perhaps retired teachers or people of that nature who would like to and be very committed to do this sort of work? Who would like to start?
Can I start with this? Yeah, so maybe I'd like to speak to this from the perspective of teacher recruitment generally, because again, I think people who are adult numeracy teachers probably come from the pool of teachers in general. And why do people become teachers in the first place? I think, again, why did I change careers and why do many of my peers become teachers? Because they think, I would like to make an impact on the next generation, really pass on my skills to them so they can fulfill their sort of educational potential. But something goes wrong along the way. And again, there's sort of educational wider status. 1 in 3 teachers leave the profession within the 5 years. And I think in maths it's probably higher. And again, if you're looking at adult teachers, adult numeracy teachers, it comes from that pool. But I think there's a couple of the sort of side issues here. One is like the government's been a bit short-sighted in terms of their cut to their AMSP, Advanced Maths Support Programme, because some of these people that do the programme, AMSP programmes, get A-level support, they go into the universities. These are people that become maths teachers and that are going to potentially later on become adult numeracy teachers. So they, again, it's that sort of pipeline. And then also recently we've seen news of universities with maths cuts. There was, I think, the CAMS, Centre for Mathematical Sciences, Campaign for Mathematical Sciences, talked about how, like Cardiff University, Oxford Brookes, Kingston, these universities are cutting down their maths departments. And you might think, that's just impacting the top end of students, but the impact on this is that, I think Lynne, McClure talked about in the first session, the undergraduates at the top sort of Russell Group universities, they end up sort of going into the traditional maths professions, accounting, banking, finance. But if you're looking at the post-1992 universities, these people are 3 times more likely to become teachers. So if you're looking at our teacher pool and adult numeracy teacher pool, you need to make sure that these cuts to universities for maths programs are reversed, as it were.
So it's the pipeline, really?
Yes, the pipeline.
Yeah. Any other comments? Are there any special skills required to teach adults maths?
I do think that teaching adults is a different proposition to teaching young people and in schools. And actually one of the pieces of evidence around effective practice in adult basic skills teaching that we've come across does highlight the importance of having teachers who are relatable to adult learners, so perhaps sharing similar characteristics and backgrounds. And so there needs to be a way for people to come into the profession. We don't represent providers as such, but from what I understand working closely with them is that there are challenges around recruitment, and whilst there might be bursaries available to support initial teacher training into maths in further education and post-16 settings, the key limitation is the fact that salaries typically tend to be much lower in further education and adult education than in schools. So there's an added, even if you solve some of the pipeline issues, there's an added disincentive there that people might end up choosing to teach in further education rather than in a school. Some of the policy reforms that we saw under the previous administration, which were very well intentioned around improving the math skills of 16 to 19-year-olds, also had a knock-on effect that some of the adult numeracy teachers were kind of brought in to prepare younger learners for their GCSEs as part of the condition of funding. So there's been a bit of a loss of focus on adult numeracy as a distinct area of practice. And certainly some of the providers that have now been trying to recreate some of that in delivering the Multiply programme have reported that when they've been able to recruit adult numeracy teachers to deliver that programme, they haven't always had some of the skills needed as an adult numeracy teacher. So if they can get a numeracy teacher, they might come across somebody who's very experienced in taking a qualification and teaching that content to learners. But Multiply, for example, provides a lot of flexibility to work with learners and develop a bespoke course that responds to their needs, and so some of the teachers weren't able to kind of work with learners to identify a set of maths skills that they would like to develop, and it was that curriculum development and flexible working with adults that was proving a challenge.
Is there any help for teachers of that, or potential adult numeracy teachers of that nature?
The help that's been available for teachers in service through the Education and Training Foundation has also been reduced, and funding there has been cut. And most of the focus of that professional development that is provided by the Education and Training Foundation is in support of the condition of funding policy for 16 to 19. So there is very little that is specifically on, some of it might well be relevant, but there is very little specifically with adult learners of numeracy skills in mind, and that compares to sort of much more comprehensive support that's been available under previous adult basic skills programmes in the past.
Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just to add, I agree with those points completely, but I think really understanding the sort of adult numeracy landscape a little bit is important. Most adults post-19 and above who engage with, say, a maths qualification, they'll normally be compelled to do that. So it might be for work or for a course of alternative study. You'll need to have that. So generally, it involves lots of people who have struggled, and so when you ask about what maybe is needed even more so or differently with adults than with children, I think ensuring that the maths that is taught is very highly contextualised, relatable, so people can understand the value straight away to their everyday lives is really important. That they build confidence quickly. So what that might look like is somebody experiencing success quite quickly, not experiencing more failure over and over again, which is what they may well have typically experienced. Those are really important aspects. When it comes to adults who are typically compelled for some other reason to take a maths qualification, what Multiply has enabled to happen is a much more diverse sort of environment around numeracy development, where we see basic numeracy being brought into all sorts of different subject areas and taught in very, very different ways, which are really meeting people where they already are, doing things that they already want to do, and then realising that there's maths within that and how that can help them and how it can help them become better or more proficient at the thing they're learning to do, whether that might be cooking or gardening or any other course that they're undertaking. So there's maybe it's not a sort of a simple workforce now. It's very diverse, and they require different skills and experiences in different ways.
Okay. And there's Young. You want to add something?
Why does the Multiply scheme fallen from grace? I mean, some people seem to think it was great, others didn't think it was value for money. What's the reality?
I could share a thought on that, I suppose. We've seen some really great activity come out of Multiply. One thing it's enabled national numeracy to do in many respects relates to the previous question, is to train people to become numeracy champions across the country. We've now trained over 2,000 numeracy champions. They don't teach maths, but they support adults to be able to build their confidence, take their first steps, signpost where they can get help, and understand that there's a psychological confidence barrier that needs to be broken down. So it's enabled things like that in all sorts of different ways to happen over the country, which I think should really be recognised as great steps forward. It insisted on innovation, which was really important because, as Alex set out, we've seen declining levels of participation for so many years that we needed to innovate to be able to engage people, and to do that in increasingly relatable, contextualised, exciting, engaging ways has been really important. It was introduced very quickly, and by requiring innovation, that innovation, particularly when a policy is rolled out across the country, I think takes time. So it took quite a long time of a 3-year programme to get going, to build momentum. I think it would be fair to say at least 12 to 18 months, really, to get fully started. And that was one of the challenges, I think. A short 3-year programme that was announced quite quickly and tried to then be put in place. It's a real shame that it's coming to an end at the end of this month. I think that there's a risk that all these gains that have been made, these innovations that have been developed, are going to be unable to continue, and that's a real shame.
Is that shared with our two other witnesses?
Yeah, just on that, like, again, I have nothing further to add on the multiply program specifically in terms of the details, but it's about signalling and messaging. If you've got a program that's focusing on trying to improve adult numeracy and giving them the right skills, cutting that suggests actually the government doesn't see that as a priority.
So yeah, just briefly to add on multiply, I would say it's a little bit too early to say on multiply, and we should wait for the result of the programme evaluation, which I believe will come out in the autumn later this year. We're involved in a regional evaluation for the West Midlands Combined Authority at the moment, and what I would say is that whilst there have been some challenges in the initial setup of the programme that was done with insufficient lead-in time, as Sam's mentioned, and so some of the money in the first year particularly wasn't spent, and there was a sort of decision not to go ahead with an online national learning platform, which again, that was sort of money that could have been spent on the delivery. But we do know that around about, I think the last figures I saw, which were last autumn, were about 188,000 adults have been engaged in numeracy learning through the programme. We need the evaluation to tell us what the outcomes of that engagement has been. Have they gone on to more substantive and more substantial forms of numeracy learning since then? Has it improved their confidence to the point where they've secured a job outcome or that kind of thing? So I do think we should wait for some of that data to come through. But I think the innovation in the programme is really important, and it has also been delivering a number of randomised control trial evaluations of what works to engage adults, and hopefully some of the findings from that will feed into mainstream numeracy provision in future. So if the programme was obviously a time-limited programme, but it would be really helpful to build in some of those learning points and different kinds of numeracy interventions into the mainstream of adult numeracy delivery in future.
Lord Ranger.
Well, my question is going to really build on the theme that there's been about engagement, and thank you, Alex, Bobby and Sam, for your time today. It's been really enlightening. Engagement with adults. I'm of a generation, I remember sort of someone like Carol Vorderman, and that's probably the role you're sort of playing now, Bobby. It was inspiring people, raising the profile of it. And, the worst thing I could think about would be the advert that says, oh, come do a free course in maths. As another, I'm just not going to do it for whatever reason. But if you were going to now design the ultimate engagement program, what do you think would be, from what you've learned so far, the things you've touched, what would be key ingredients that you would say should be in that program now?
I could certainly say a bit on that, and you're absolutely right about ensuring there are people that are passionate and are really helping and supporting people in the public eye. Like Bobby, as a national numeracy ambassador, plays a huge role in able to break down some of the barriers that people have and show that actually improvement is possible and really get across those clear messages. What we've learned at National Numeracy over the last 12-13 years in terms of what works is firstly to be able to understand where people are and to go to them rather than, as you just said, come and take a course in maths. That involves someone going somewhere else, doing something else. I think meeting people where they are is really important. Understanding how they feel to start with. They're feeling negative often about maths. So leading with maths is often a bad idea. And we make this mistake again and again and again. It's incredible how many maths course posters you see advertised with equations in the background. Well, it's the equations, it's that kind of school-based maths that people have developed an aversion to. So we need to talk about value. Always lead with value. This is how it can help you. This is how it can help you feel more in control of your finances, get into work, build a sustainable career, support your children. When it comes to supporting children, we often think about parents and carers struggling with the methods that are used nowadays. That puts a lot of parents and carers off. But actually, if parents and carers know that the most important thing they could do is talk about the value of maths and numeracy at home, bring it into everyday life, that's actually shown in research to be one of the most powerful factors. So lead with value. We need to change the cycle. where people have experienced failure, they don't believe they can improve, and therefore they're shut down to maths, where we need to make people feel and experience success quickly. We have something called the National Numeracy Challenge. It meets people where they are. They can do it online. They can get started in 10 minutes. It's bite-sized. They experience success quickly. If they experience failure, it stops. All of these things we've learned and put into practice, making it relatable, contextualising all maths that we do, never having abstract maths, is something that's really, really important. And make sure everything is designed for adults. Not really just repurposed, as often things are, from material that's for children, which can often appear quite patronising.
You mentioned equations. Can I just ask, how do you overcome maths anxiety that is quite common amongst lots of people?
Yeah, we see a huge amount of maths anxiety. In adults, as many as 35% of adults say they experience some form of maths anxiety. And that can range from real mild tension right up to external panic for people. There's some great organisations as well as National Numeracy that work around this. The Maths Anxiety Trust, people like Professor Tom Hunt and others that have done a lot of work around this that we harness at National Numeracy. Taking a step back, people taking their time, not being put under pressurised situations. That a lot of it comes from being put on the spot and those situations in life where we might be put on the spot. An exam kind of experience taking us back to maybe where that anxiety was developed from. Giving people that space. There's lots of different tools, techniques and approaches that can be taken to reduce that anxiety.
There is this cultural perception that some people just can't do maths, which obviously is very concerning. What can be done to dispel that perception?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things we've seen is ensuring that there are relatable role models available. So somebody comes to us who is struggling, who doesn't believe they can improve, or we go to them, the first thing they will see is somebody just like them, who feels the same as them, who has managed to overcome that. And I think that's an incredibly powerful message to say everybody can improve. And here's an example of someone who felt just like you, who did improve. That's something we've learned is incredibly powerful.
Ernest Walmersey.
Thank you. Quick follow-up. Sam, I've heard you say 3 times we need to approach people where they are.
Yeah.
Now, one place where many people are who've struggled with numeracy and experienced failure is prisons. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of good work in prisons, not enough, and in not enough places. But do you know of any examples of good work in prisons that has a wider application? And how can that be spread more widely?
I think there is really important and good work going on in prisons. I think I completely agree. It's an area that we would love to do more work in, and realise that there is a bit of a gap there, and we see that around education in general in the prison environment. There are lots of great organisations actually doing some fantastic work already in prisons. I think one of the conditions that I see as being successful is again focus on value. So when we try and again, like with anybody, go back to kind of what the maths we learnt at school and the way we taught it at school and the way we learnt it, that's something that puts people off very much. So we need to have a different approach to engage people.
Yeah, so on this, so some of my points sort of echo Sam's, but I was doing the Brighton Half Marathon on Sunday, so if I'm limping, it's because of that. But when people talk to me, what do you do? And I said, I'm a maths teacher, immediately they're like, oh, I could never do maths at school, I hated it. And I said to them, what's in your hand? You've got a watch, yeah? So in your run, what are you going to be working out? Your times, your average times, and you've probably been thinking about your calories and your training regimes, and that's all practical application of maths. So as Sam said, there is an image problem where people think of maths, they think back to their days at 15 and 16. So I think we've got to work on how we can change that. And in terms of where people are at, I'll come to that in a second. Before that, quickly, let's go into the barriers. So when you mention like the barriers of maths anxiety, so again, the definition, because I started doing my doctoral research in this, is that negative emotional reaction you get when you encounter maths. And then for children, it can be when they see a problem in class, or for adults, it can be when that restaurant bill comes. And the problem with this maths anxiety is that it impedes or interferes with your ability. Because in the real world, actually a little bit of anxiety is good. So if I'm, I was on Dictionary Corner Encounter a year ago, and I definitely felt nervous because I'm on the spot now, but a little bit is good. It's like Goldilocks, but too much can impair your ability. And I think with maths we found, too many people in this country have that maths anxiety that tips them over. And I think part of that is obviously there is something separate about our brains, like the fear center of the brain that lights up when we see maths is often the same part when we see snakes. So there is that separate issue. But there is this sort of cultural acceptability of saying you can't do maths. And I'll tell you, I think there's probably a Western issue here as well. So my parents are from India, and when I compare my cousins in India in maths compared to my cousins in London, generally my cousins in India are better at maths. But when they go to their parents' evenings, the teachers there ask, what is your son or daughter doing? Are they doing extra tuition? Whereas in England, if one of my cousins was doing well at maths, the teacher immediately says, oh, your child is extremely bright, they must have a gift. And of course, people do have giftedness, but I think maths is something that people can achieve if they work hard over a long period of time. So I think it's a big cultural piece. And in terms of where people are at, I know the Gen Zs and above, there are a lot of them on social media. So I think there's a powerful role for working with influencers to try and change the messaging around maths, because, almost like Gokwan makeover, but an equivalent, but using social media. So the more we can make people think maths is cool and relevant, again, like whether it's a running influencer, whether it's a cooking influencer, and showing them actually this is all maths, it's not just Pythagoras and trigonometry.
Alex, is there anything to add on maths anxiety?
I would like to add on the places where people are at, and I very much recognise prisons as one context, although I do find that interventions in prisons are a sort of slightly different kettle of fish to interventions in other areas of life. But in the past we've run programmes of maths mentoring, which is a volunteer-based approach. It's not teaching, but it's engaging people, supporting them. I think there's a role for that kind of programme, along with champions, as Sam's mentioned, and volunteers can play a really useful complementary role. The other place where people are at is at work, and I don't think we're doing enough to work with employers on engaging them in the numeracy skills of their workforce. It's often sort of associated with unemployed adults having numeracy skills needs, but we know that many of the adults who have low numeracy skills are in fact in work, and that holds them back from progressing into better paid, more secure work. If you have lower level skills, you're less likely to be offered further training, and we know that by international standards, employers invest far less in training in the UK than they do in other countries. So I think this is something that should really be picked up as part of skills strategy and policy, because the evidence does show that one of the things that can really make a difference to whether somebody engages in learning or not is the support of their line manager in the workplace, and the support of other advocates such as union learning representatives and so on. So that's a really important context where we can engage people.
Thank you. Lord Borwick.
Thank you. Is there a need for new specific qualification, aside from GCSE and existing level 2 qualifications? What do you think should be included in that new qualification?
Sam, would you like to start?
Yes, I think there is a need. We heard a lot in the first panel about some of the things around GCSE in particular that aren't proving to be successful. And there's been some great alternatives and additional stepping stones proposed by people like exam boards, OCR and AQA have good examples, as well as the Maths Futures programme from the Royal Society that we heard about earlier as well. I think we need this because this norm referenced approach that Lynne McClure talked about earlier, where we have to have around a third of people failing by design in the system, more or less, means that we are constantly, every year, adding to this group of millions of people that are struggling. We should have the means through which to ensure that there's a certificate of some sort, a qualification of some sort, that everybody can demonstrate that they have the basics in place, that they're competent, that means something to employers. And what it means is they can do the things that employers need them to be able to do, something that can be trusted. We've already seen from some of the data around GCSEs, around maths, that it's not something really we can trust that, or employers can trust in that at all. It's really just a benchmark of comparison. It's how it's used. So we do need something else, potentially as a stepping stone towards GCSE. So something that everybody could show what they know and can do and demonstrate that and pass, a bit like that kind of driving test kind of approach where everybody has a chance of passing it, and passing it would have some currency. So yes, we should have something else. How that works, what level that's at, whether it's a certificate or something else is to be seen. At National Numeracy, we have the Essentials of Numeracy, which is a framework which has pulled together all of the maths that you need in everyday life, and we have a certificate you can get for that through the National Numeracy Challenge. Now, that's an alternative, that's an option, that's something that if employers adopted and could be really, really powerful. But however we do that, we do need something that means that more young people, in fact every young person, whether they get on well or don't get on well or struggle, they can come back to and feel that they've got a good chance of being able to, if they practice and prepare and persist, they can pass it.
Very good. Bobby?
So yeah, in 2025, which as a maths teacher is 45 squared, quite excited. I think it's a tragedy that we're in a country where we should be having aspirations for the very top. We should have 100% literacy, should have 100% numeracy, and obviously there's always going to be leakage there, but we're miles from that. And it's a tragedy that our system of education, our GCSE system, creates a norm reference place where 1/3, about 200,000 children leave every single year. So within 5 years, another 1 million adults are there that are told that they can't do maths, they can't use numeracy. So clearly our GCSE is not fit for purpose for them. And again, from the top end, does it serve the needs of the people that are going to be our future AI and data scientists? If, again, listen to Conrad earlier, I'm not sure it does either. But it's definitely failing our bottom half, our bottom third, I mean. So with those, there should be definitely some sort of other qualification. I know in Scotland, they're like additional qualification. I think a standard in arithmetic, there should be something numeracy-based where if you leave school just with that very qualification, at least you can use numbers on a day-to-day basis. Because I think our school system, we're failing people if they leave after 11 years, from 5 to 16, feelings of numbers aren't their thing.
Alex?
Yes, I think that we need a broad and inclusive learning offer for adults, and part of that might be the GCSE qualification, because if somebody didn't get it at school, they might well want to go back and get it later in life. They should have the opportunity to do so. But we also need a different kind of qualification alongside that, and that has been the role played for a number of years now by the functional skills maths qualification. And that qualification was last reformed around 2018, I think. And unfortunately, contrary to the intent of the reform, which was to make it more relevant to the kinds of skills that employers need in the workplace, it actually made the qualification more closer to the academic content of GCSEs in a sort of pursuit of rigour. But actually it's less relevant now than it should be, and I think we're probably coming to a point where the content of that qualification should be looked at again to make sure that it is genuinely suitable, as its stated intent is, as a qualification for life and for work. I do think there's value in smaller bite-sized qualifications like the stepping stones qualifications that Sam mentioned, and there's value in things like the multiply interventions, which are generally non-accredited learning. I think we need all of those in place, and we need to look at what the progression pathways are between those things. In terms of some of the content, what we're seeing from things like multiply is that the sort of everyday financial skills, financial literacy, money management are really popular in engaging people. So I don't see why we can't have a bit more of that kind of content in functional skills, for example. And some of the interesting work that I've seen going on is around sort of, yes, obviously we need to include sort of the basic number work, calculation, measures, shapes and space and those kinds of things. But, some of the ways in which you can make the content more engaging is there was a project a few years ago called Citizen Maths, which was using sort of big mathematical concepts like uncertainty and probability, which are very relevant in day-to-day life. So if you're, advised by your doctor that you could have an operation, but there's, an 80% chance of success, what kind of sense do you make of that? These are real everyday math skills. Developing that understanding of risk and proportion and representation are other examples of those sort of big concepts steps. There's not maybe probability only comes into functional skills at level 2, I think. So you could make more use of some of those bits of maths that are applicable to day-to-day life to make the content more relevant.
I can't stand to go. Last question.
It is the last question, and thank you very much for coming to give us the evidence, and it's been very interesting. The committee, as a result of today's session, is probably going to draw up a letter to the government with conclusions and recommendations about its policies on mathematics and numeracy and functional mathematics. That's what committees do. If you were in our places, making the decision on the top 3 recommendations which you'd like to make to the government, what are they? So it's a succinct question, your top 3 priorities in each case, and perhaps you'd like to start.
Yes, I'm happy to start on that. So I think the first thing that I would say is that we are hearing reports that the Adult Skills Fund may be further reduced in coming spending rounds. So I would say don't do that. And I would also say we haven't really got into the detail of this so far, but most of that money is now devolved to metro mayors and other devolved areas, and more of that will be the case in future. So I'd say don't cut that funding, and also hold the metro mayors and devolved areas to account on how that money is spent on securing adult numeracy outcomes. Secondly, we need to tackle low employer engagement and investment in skills. As I mentioned previously, we would suggest allowing the non-apprenticeship element of the Growth and Skills Levy to support adult numeracy training in the workplace. And thirdly, I think it's important that we develop a more joined-up skills system. So what I mean by that is partly about sort of promoting lifelong learning more broadly. We can't look at adult numeracy in silo, and many of the people that we're talking about today will of course require support perhaps with literacy or digital skills or English for speakers of other languages. So we should have a holistic offer for those people who would benefit from improving their skills. And when I say joined up, I mean we should join up with those opportunities that we have to reach people. So that might be through employment programs in Job Centre Plus, it might be in prisons, it might be in the workplace, it might be through housing associations, it might even be through people visiting their GP and being referred by social prescribing into learning. But we need a more joined up skills offer for adults.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as a teacher, obviously, firstly, I'm going to say about the maths teacher talent pool, that should be a really high priority for the government, to look at whether, like Lynne said, whether it's financial incentives, career structures, clearly the shortage of that ultimately impacts the quality of teaching throughout the country and adult education ultimately. And then secondly, I would say about our short-sightedness in not supporting universities and their maths education, closing many departments, especially the ones at the post-1992 universities. Because ultimately, this is the pipeline of people that go on to become future data scientists, AI workers, but also teachers too, so that the university piece. And the third one is about the fitness of the GCSE and whether it serves a purpose. Because again, I think there definitely should be some sort of alternative that makes sure that young people, adults, have their numeracy skills, they've got financial literacy, they can understand and handle data, they can measure and estimate in daily lives. So that sort of alternate benchmark qualification should be there as well.
Thank you.
I would add a new criterion referenced numeracy qualification, bringing in the maths that everybody needs throughout their daily lives, perhaps as a stepping stone to GCSE, that really has value and currency, and is valued by employers as well as by people pursuing, young people or adults pursuing it. I'd also really suggest that we stop through policy insisting that the only way to build your numeracy skills is by taking a considerable course to start with. After the end of this month, there is no way to fund at all those early stepping stones to build people's confidence, to take those first steps before a more formal course. that's a real shame, and I would really suggest that we find a way to continue that work. And then finally, to be able to build on some of the, I think that what we've learned and the innovations that have come from Multiply, so having a real interest in looking at what's been shown to work over the last 3 years with adults to help them re-engage with learning and to build upon those in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we've learned a great deal from you. All three of you. We're very grateful for you coming to give your evidence. Please feel free to send us any follow-up evidence that may occur to you after the session. And thank you very much indeed again for coming. And that concludes today's public